I think the fire service is doing a wonderful job at preparing engineers on the scene for the perfect world scenarios of staying up to date on fire hose, on different technology changes with the fire trucks. But what if some of those perfect world scenarios are not perfect world?
Enchanted Sky Media.
From Los Angeles, this is Code 3, the Firefighters Podcast, hosted by award-winning journalist Scott Orr. Code 3 features interviews with leading members of the fire service, discussing firefighting strategy, tactics, and other topics you need to know more about. Now, here's Scott.
That's right, and I will not let Parkinson stop me. Thank you for joining me again here on Code 3. You are listening to the show for and about firefighters. Let's get started. Are you an engineer, or maybe a chauffeur, or perhaps an MPO? Regardless of the title, if you operate the pump panel on an engine, you need to know a lot of technical details to be good at your job. And the guys on the other end of the line are depending on you to know it. So how well do you know the way your apparatus operates? Many people with technical jobs are satisfied to be able to do well when everything's working right, but you don't really earn your pay until you come through when the situation goes sideways. Here to talk about what a great engineer knows is Paul Watlington. He's a battalion chief with the Burlington, North Carolina Fire Department. And Paul Watlington, welcome to Code 3.
Scott, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
So there's a joke on the internet that always goes, I was told there would be no math involved. But this is a job that involves a lot of math. Are new engineer candidates sometimes surprised by how much they need to know?
Well, I think it's kind of sensitive to the department that they're working. Obviously, if your department strives to be technical on the nozzle and view all of the technical aspects of what's going on in the fires that we're attacking and the actual flows and all of the other technicalities of the nozzle and hose, then, it does involve math. And some of the basic math that these firefighters or the engineers are actually using on scene, they kind of determine, and the department kind of determines the complexity of it. Many departments use pump charts, which alleviate a lot of math, and then you have some departments that their engineers strive on actually using the friction loss formulas and GPM formulas to determine their own math or determine their own results from the math that they're using. We on the fire ground, most fire departments are on the same page when it comes to thumb rules and pump charts to alleviate most of the calculations and math that is required to be used. And that's great, but I think it's very important that those engineers and those that are using that math know where those results come from. And there's constantly changes in fire hose. And you might have a new nozzle on the market that, gives you a different GPM at a different pressure. And being able to, know how that GPM affects the friction loss in that fire hose, in that particular hose, it's important. I think, knowing where that information is coming really makes the difference.
Well, to me, it's sort of like the idea that, and everything is going right, an engineer looks like a hero. But if something happens, a piece of equipment fails, a gauge fails, then you suddenly have to be able to do things differently. And that's when you really earn your pay.
Well, I think about that a lot because, I've had the opportunity to do assessments and train with other departments locally and, not as locally as, the state of North Carolina. I've done some stuff in Virginia too, but, seeing how other departments operate, we like to treat these scenarios when we're pumping fire trucks, when we're operating as engineers on the fire ground as if everything was perfect. A lot of training is based around the actual fire attack and the engineer or the pump operator gets to test their skills and knowledge as well. But a lot of those evolutions that I've participated in the past really have no adversity for the engineer to have to work through. So, it kind of made me think a little bit different as an instructor to throw in some of those adversities, to prepare that engineer for things that are unforeseen, supply line being jeopardized or a faulty hose line in the system where you got a hose that's busted or pressure transducer on one of these new pressure governor trucks that are on the market today goes bad. How do you overcome those adversities? I think the fire service is doing a wonderful job at preparing engineers on the scene for the perfect world scenarios of staying up to date on fire hose, on different technology changes with the fire trucks. But what if some of those perfect world scenarios are not perfect world? I've had particular incidents where I pull up to catch a hydrant. One of the hydrant caps is missing off of the hydrant. What do? Something with a 2.5 to shut it off. Put a nozzle on it. Put a gate valve on. Hose line's busting. That hose line may very well be okay at 150 feet if you're using a 200-foot pre-connect. So you just eliminate that one busted section. Well, does that pump operator know, how to make those, reactive changes to that pump pressure to, you're eliminating friction loss when you eliminate hose. So.
Right. Now, that's important to know. The question is, are you finding ways to simulate these things in practice drills?
I do. A lot of times when we're evaluating or preparing firing engineers, we do throw those adversities in. We will take a cap off of a hydrant. We will go to them and simulate their supply line, whether it be 4-inch, 5-inch, 3-inch, losing their supply line. We'll go in and say, okay, your pressure transducer has just failed. You don't have those protections of fluctuation in your apparatus. You have to switch to RPM mode. The pump won't go into gear at all. We'll throw in that you'll have a discharge that does not work, but the hose line is actually pulled off of the truck. FDC is not operating correctly. Just throw in those adversities. And what that does is gets our engineers to think outside of the box and utilize other resources and learn how to make those changes at a moment's notice because, everything's done at a sense of urgency on the fire ground. Everybody knows that, from the nozzle all the way back to the decision-making in the command post. So one of those decisions or one of those operating aspects of the fire ground is delayed in any way, and it affects everything.
You mentioned pressure governors. Don't they have the same kind of a liability as an aircraft autopilot, which is you could become complacent?
Well, I think one of the biggest things about pressure governors is understanding how they work so that you understand if in the event of a failure, how do you mitigate that adversity? So, yes, I guess a lot of people could look at the pressure governors as being putting the truck on autopilot. I've even had people say, hey, you can pump a pressure governor truck with one hand. Well, that's not necessarily true if you're doing it the right way. But understanding the failures on those and what happens when you have surges, what's the difference, what's happening inside of that truck when you activate the truck in PSI mode versus RPM mode. You put it back in RPM mode, you're basically turning the truck back into one of the conventional manual throttle trucks that a lot of us came up on, but without the pressure relief valve. So I think the biggest thing is making sure that these engineers understand that there are still plenty of things that could happen to hurt your operation when operating in PSI mode. And if those things do happen, what can you do in a moment's notice to fix it or move to a different operation?
Is that something you would expect engineers to train on? What if it failed?
Well, I think they do because, there's so many things that can happen, and many of them will actually, present themselves. Most of the pressure governors will have like a digital screen on them. If it says, if you have a problem with your water supply or problem with interlock, which means the truck's not going into pump gear or operator error, it tells you a lot. So when you're able to see that and understand, okay, if this is popping up on the screen, I know in the back of my head what I need to do to overcome this obstacle. So I think you do have to train with those adversities with the pressure transducers when in PSI mode versus RPM mode. There are times where the truck needs to be pumped in RPM mode versus PSI mode and vice versa. But when operating in one of those modes, I think it's important to understand and train for those adversities. Again, going back to the sense of urgency. Those nozzle crews inside of that house fire, that building fire, or what you have, they don't have that luxury. It's a safety issue. They could possibly go without the adequate pressure to perform the operations on the inside.
Right, and at the fire ground is not the first time to be thinking, what should I do if this fails?
No. And I mean, that goes for training on anything.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for years, what I've seen is people train on, as you mentioned, on the engineer position as though everything was going to work.
Well, and again, I mean, that goes back to the training. I've thought of this own, I guess, kind of saying in my head when it comes to safety and survival on the fire ground with the firefighters. We go in, we spend a lot of time in training searching for victims, and that's great. You cannot train on that enough, but we always hear of falling back on the fundamentals. When all hell breaks loose, fall back on your fundamentals and using those fundamentals to help you overcome adversities on the fire ground. Well, if we're training for, all hell breaking loose, why not make that part of your fundamentals? Train on the adversities. You have to train on the things that you could possibly run into that are not in the perfect world scenario to be even more prepared. That just, now you're operating still in an adverse situation with a sense of urgency, and you're not, backing up, in a group trying to figure out how to work yourself out of this problem. There are going to obviously be, situations that you do have to sit back and think, okay, let's take what we know and let's overcome this. We've never seen this before. But if there's an opportunity to train on that, go ahead and throw that in. We do VES, okay? Well, instead of doing your vent inner search or go in and do your vent inner search, but while you're in there, simulate a possible down firefighter. Simulate, other horrible things that could happen on that scene doing that drill and react from it.
I'll be back with more right after this.
Don't miss your chance to get your hands on the hottest logo wear around. Code 3 podcast gear makes you look good and tells the world you're a fan. Now you can wear the Code 3 logo proudly. Just go to our website, code3podcast.com. Click the banner and you'll be able to order an assortment of cool apparel and accessories. And thanks for supporting the podcast that supports firefighters.
How much time do you think an engineer can spend away from the pump panel on the fire ground helping other firefighters?
I think it's actually sensitive to the scene. It's sensitive to your resources. It's sensitive to the department's policies. I personally prefer, and I teach my engineers, and other engineers that I interact with to, the pump panel is your office. You don't work in someone else's office. You work in your office. Now, if you need to step out of your office to do something, that's okay. But when things need to be done in your office and you're not there to do them, it's going to affect your overall operation. It's not like a production line in a mill where production simply slows down. You've got people's lives on those nozzles. You have other things that you're responsible for, that people's lives are in your hands. And you don't want to be away from that pump panel when you lose your water supply, or when that hose line busts, or when anything else that pops up that you have to instantly or immediately mitigate. I've seen some engineers step away from the pump panel to take a piece of equipment off of the truck, like a PPV fan or pipe pole, and that's okay. I mean, you're responsible for that equipment, but you don't want to be standing at the door operating that PPV fan and you got nozzle firefighters inside of a house fire, and you're stepped away from the pump panel. Some fire departments are real good about setting up a perimeter on a house fire, on a building fire, to where there is no traffic coming through the scene. So you don't have to worry about somebody running over your supply line or any type of vandalism to a hydrant. I've actually heard of situations where hydrants are actually turned off by vandals or bystanders just to see what would happen. People have weird, curious minds. To be able to be there at that pump panel and reading those gauges tell you a lot. You can see drops on the pump panel. Those drops on the discharge gauges, I mean, they tell you a lot. You see a substantial drop in your intake. It tells you a lot. You're looking at most fire departments in the United States keep at least a 20 residual on their pump panel. Well, I mean, if something happens on their intake, but if something happens and it drops down below 20, you've got to be there to do something about it.
That takes discipline. An Air Force buddy of mine once used the phrase, people make excellent manipulators, but not very good monitors.
And that's why you'll hear people throughout the fire service say, are you a pump operator or are you a lever puller? I mean, I could teach my son how to pull a lever on a fire truck and make water come out of a nozzle, but can I teach him the technicalities of it, when and when not to do certain things, how you are reading that pump panel and being able to tell what is going on the inside of the house simply by watching gauges. There's a difference in professional pump operators and lever pullers. And, do we have both? Yeah, we got both. And sometimes it works okay, in some situations to just pump a tight line, give me pressure, give me enough pressure till water comes out of the nozzle. What's going to happen? The fire's going to go out. Okay. Well, I result back a lot of times to a quote in a podcast I was listening to with Dennis Laguerre. Dennis, one heck of an instructor. I've learned a lot of my stuff from Dennis, but Dennis, looks at, the fire's going to go out. But if we can capture bad practice as success, meaning that, yes, the fire's going to go out if water's put on it. But, do we know what's coming out of that nozzle? Are we delivering a sufficient amount of GPMs? Could we have done it faster? Could we have done it more safer, more efficient? Well, if you don't know that and you're not willing to know the technicalities of that position, then it's just, there's a big difference.
All right, Paul Watlington, thanks for joining me today on Code 3.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we put some more information about the things a great engineer should know and do on our website at code3podcast.com/panel. Check it out. Don't forget there are a couple ways you can support this podcast. Number one is you can buy a t-shirt. I think you'll like these. They look just like regular station duty wear, except that the Maltese cross is the Code 3 logo. The other way, of course, is to make a pledge at our Patreon account. Pledge $10 a month or more, and you get access to the Code 3 Bull Session. This is extra content that doesn't make the regular show, and only people who pledge $10 a month or more do get access to it. You can find both of these links over at code3podcast.com on the right sidebar. There's two big old buttons. Just click one and you'll be able to help support the show that supports firefighters. All right, that's it. That's all for this edition of Code 3. Thank you for listening, as always. I'll be back next time with more, and I hope you'll be here. I'm Scott Orr, and until then, stay safe.
Code 3 is a production of Enchanted Sky Media. To contact us, get more information on today's topic, or to subscribe to the podcast, go to code3podcast.com.